Anime is a form of art that I've loved ever since I was a little kid around 6 watching Pokemon. Consuming anime has always given me this feeling of fantasy and excitement that most normal cartoons can't usually give me. So naturally, around a year ago, when I found out that there was an anime by Black Samurai, I was intrigued to say the least. There aren't many animes that have a protagonist that is a person of color, so this news excited me greatly. Then I watched it and was like, oh my gosh, anime is so amazing, I recommend showing it to everybody that you know, watch it now. Yeah, I no longer feel that way watching it again nearly a year later. While I think Afro Samurai is a decent anime with fantastic fight scenes and a phenomenal OST, in terms of narrative, it's definitely lacking in a few areas. This video is essentially shedding light on some areas of the narrative that I felt should have either been explained more or executed better. Episode 1. The entire story focuses around a black samurai named Afro, as well as these two headbands called Number 1 and the Number 2. Whoever has the Number 1 headband will essentially become a god and will be able to rule the world. But the only person that can challenge Number 1 is Number 2. With that in mind, I'm going to be referring to these headbands as Number 1 and Number 2 as they're referred to in the story. The story starts with Afro's father, Rokutaro, meeting up with a man named Justice, who has the Number 2, so they can duel for the Number 1 that Rokutaro currently has. They fight for a little bit, but their fight ends with Justice beheading Rokutaro and taking the Number 1 for himself. Afro witnesses all of this and is brought to tears. Justice then walks up to him and tells him that he knows Afro will want revenge, and that he'll be waiting. He then walks away laughing, and we then cut to Afro as an adult facing off against a bunch of swordsmen who are after the Number 2. Afro, of course, slaughters them easily because he is now the current owner of the Number 2. While he's fighting, we see an elderly man spying on him who we later find out to be Brother 2 of the MT7, a clan of monks who are after the Number 2 and the Number 1. We then cut back to Afro, who runs to Ninja, a character with a white afro, whose talkative and relaxed personality contrasts Afro's cold and serious personality by ultimately just being the that reacts to things.
Hey, that a motherfucking RPG? You got a motherfucking RPG? A RPG in a motherfucking backpack? Hey, he's trying to copy you. Hold up, that is you. Wait a minute. Whoa. Which one is you? Yo, stop thinking, Afro. He's reading your mind.
He tells Afro that they were being spied on, but Afro doesn't seem to care, and we cut to the next day where we see a small man who looks like a discount golem run into the bar where he tells people that Afro is on his way to their town. This caused a mixed response, with some people being naturally nervous, but other people being way too overconfident, saying that they'll kill him themselves even though he's one of the best swordsmen in the world. This results in a bar fight. I'm only going to assume they were drunk because everything that has transpired within these past few minutes outside of Discount Golem telling them that Afro was coming has made no sense at all. Not long after that, Afro comes to the bar to order some lemonade and one of the drunk thugs smashes glass just to screw with them. He asks for another one and puts it on said thug's tab. This enrages the thug and he tries to punch Afro, but Afro backhands him with no effort at all. The woman then tells Afro he still needs to pay for the lemonade because said thug's tab has run out. Luckily, the other thugs come to their senses and they pay for his lemonade, which Afro drinks with a straw so dope that I killed to have one for myself. The bar lady then tells Afro to go to Mount Shumi where Justice is currently residing, and he proceeds to leave. However, one of the guys from the bar stalks him and later reveals himself to be a weapon master from the west named Shoshan, who of course is after the Number 2. Ninja tells Afro that he shouldn't face him because he's got arrows and grenades and Afro ignores him and they fight for a little over a minute before Afro kills him with a thick slice to the head. Brother 2 is once again seen spying on them, except this time he calls Brother 1 and lets him know about the situation. We then see all the brothers contribute something differently to the whole operation despite looking the same, and we also see their leader who is getting rubbed and licked on by a hot woman. A woman who has no reason to be there at all and is really just there for eye candy. I have no problem with hot anime girls or fan service, and some of the Twitter accounts I follow are a clear indication of this. But from a story perspective, she's just infatuated with him because he's rich, I'm guessing? I honestly don't know. The show never really explains. She's just supposed to like him for some reason. Brother 1 then informs everyone else about how everything is going according to plan, and they all start praising God for their progress. Brother 1 continues monologuing, and while doing so, we see some other members who are working for the MT7, including a mad scientist and a young Japanese woman named Okiku. The episode then ends when Afro realizes he got a wound from the other fight, and Brother 6, who was also watching everything alongside Brother 2, uses this as an opportunity to one-up Afro by nuking him with an RPG. For a first episode, it's fine. It does a decent job at introducing the heroes and villains of the series, has a great fight scene at the beginning where Afro slices a bullet in half, and the credits theme at the end is also a nice piece of music as well. My biggest gripe with this episode, I would have to say, is the bar scene, not only because of how little sense it makes, but also because the dialogue at points is
What a bunch of sissies. Screw that, cowards. You guys just watch while I take that #2 headband.
That's all bullshit. You assholes just watch. I'm gonna take him out.
It's gonna be me.
Let me take him, baby. He's all mine.
Nah, I'm gonna be the #2.
Oh, y'all just shut up. Because while you talk and talk and talk, my spear will be splitting his head in half.
Questionable, to say the least. Episode 2. This episode is basically 65% flashbacks and 45% non-flashbacks. So to make things simple, I'm going to just summarize all the flashback sequences first and then move on to non-flashback stuff. The episode opens with Kid Afro running away from some bandits, who are after him because he kept the #2 after Justice initially discarded it. They corner Afro and break the bag he was carrying, which they realized was holding Rokutaro's deceased head. Rather than being freaked out by it like normal human beings, they instead play hot potato and bait Afro into a trap that ends with him almost getting killed and the bandits getting away with the #2. He is later found by 2 kids named Otsuru and Jino. Their master agrees to take him in and he trains him alongside other students who are also orphans in the art of sword fighting. We later get a good scene of Afro bonding with Jino, Otsuru, and the other orphans while they're out catching fish, which is a scene that I'm glad they decided to use. While I've never fished myself, it seems to always be used in media as a way of getting characters to bond with one another. This instance is no different and I think they execute it well here. Later on, Afro overhears some guys talking about how a man who's currently got the #2 is in town. Realizing this, Afro tracks down one of the dudes and asks him where the #2 is. Said dude plays dumb, and this enrages Afro, causing him to slit the dude's throat. However, despite being weak, he's still alive and tells Afro that when you fight to kill, to finish the job, and then kills himself. This traumatizes Afro so much that on his way back to his master's dojo, as he's walking through a river, he looks at his reflection and sees the dead person's face in the water, which reminds him of his father's death. Once he gets back, he gets chewed out by his master, who tells him that living the life of the #2 leads to nothing but a life of murder. Remember this line because it becomes relevant for what happens later. The next day, we see Afro and the orphans try some lemonade for the first time, which most of them hate, but Afro seems to like. I'm guessing Afro is the only one with good taste. Seriously, have you ever met anyone who doesn't like lemonade? Anyway, later on, some thugs from the city Afro was in the previous night show up and they're like, "Hey kid, we know you killed our brother the other night, even though none of us actually saw you do it and are essentially just here so there can be another dope fighting scene." Of course, they don't actually say that, but they might as well have because they have zero evidence that Afro is the one who killed them. I mean, he did, but how do they know that Afro is the one who did it when he immediately left after killing him? The only witness that was there that night was his girlfriend, so maybe she told them, but even then, they must be some pretty dumb gang members if they just automatically believed her when they said that some black child with a sword came in and cut her boyfriend's throat. That being said, while a small fight scene of Afro killing the thugs is a good one with him using the lemonade he was carrying as a distraction, him flat out spitting it in one of the thugs' face like a badass, I can't help but point out how unrealistic it is, even by anime standards. Keep in mind, Afro is a kid right now, who is still under his master's training. He shouldn't be this proficient as a swordsman simply because of his lack of experience. So him killing 4 to 5 bandits on his own just doesn't feel natural. I feel this scene should have been executed differently. Have them all run away from the thugs and hide, or have them get their master and they could all fight them together. Either of those would have been more realistic options, and while they wouldn't have been as cool, it still would have made Afro's talent as a swordsman when he's an adult feel more earned. But I digress. Before Afro kills the thug, he asks him where the #2 is, but the thug reveals that there is a new #2 and that Afro will never find him. Afro then kills the last thug, with Otsuru witnessing all this transpire, and that ends the flashback sequences of this episode. While not perfect, they get the job done of explaining some of Afro's past to the viewer, as well as introducing characters and their relevance in the plot. The non-flashback sequences of this episode are really just about Okiku taking care of Afro and helping him recover. Once Afro gets better, he plans on leaving, but Okiku asks him to stay for one more night so they can watch the fireworks together, and he agrees to do so. We later get a pretty hot scene of Okiku talking to someone on the phone while bathing. We soon find out that the person on the other end is Brother 1, showing us that Okiku is secretly double agent. Afro runs into her bathing while he's out cutting bamboo, and she sees him eavesdropping.
Sorry.
Props to this show for not making this scene predictable like other animes would, and instead making it more down to earth and more realistic. We then cut to Afro and Okiku watching the fireworks, where one thing leads to another, and of course they end up having sex. Really, it's just that simple. But when doing so, Okiku tries to kill Afro with a hair pick, but is too in the moment to go through with it. Afterwards, we find out unsurprisingly that Okiku is really Otsuru, and that she was deciphering Afro's sword skills through his dreams, and was sending the data back to the MT7. Not long after that, they soon realize they're under attack from some goons from the MT7. The rest of the episode beyond this point basically goes like this. Brother 1 kills Otsuru for her being a traitor, Brother 6 then burns down her house, and Afro and Ninja continue their journey with him giving Afro Otsuru's hair pick as a memento. I would say this episode was too flashback heavy, but considering how short this anime is, I can see why they had to do that. Episode 3 starts with, yes, another flashback. But don't worry, there aren't nearly as many flashbacks in this episode compared to the last episode. The flashback shows Afro's teacher giving him some more lessons on how to be a better swordsman and have good technique, which doesn't do much except further prove my point about how Afro should have been no match for those goons in the previous episode. But it is relevant for what happens later, so it makes sense why they put it in. We then see Afro and Ninja continuing their journey to Mount Shumi via boat. They make it to shore and continue up the mountain while Brother 2 continues to spy on them while updating the rest of the clan. The MD7 then try to decide who should take him down, but then Brother 1 unveils his ultimate weapon of destruction, Afro Droid. He shows how deadly Afro Droid is by having it kill all the gang members in the clan except for the brothers themselves. I would say that's an unwise move because you've now made your army much smaller, but considering who they're up against, getting rid of the weak soldiers is probably a good move. They send Afro Droid out to kill Afro, and they fight for a bit with Afro Droid initially gaining the upper hand, but then Afro remembers what his master told him about being unpredictable and is then able to kill him. Surprised at this outcome, the clan blows up the bridge with Afro barely escaping. We then see just how weak the brothers really are when Afro enters the temple and slaughters them one by one. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. Despite the fact that the show has been trying to build the MT7 to be these major threats, the brothers themselves are actually quite pathetic. So that's a bit of a letdown. Although the way Afro takes out Brother 2 by poking out his eyes and shoving his binoculars into them is just hilarious in my opinion. But Afro's luck is cut short when Afro Droid comes back and gives him even more of a fight. I'm just gonna say that their second fight is way better than their first. From Afro reflecting Afro Droid's laser beams to Afro Droid flying all the way up into the sky with Afro and Afro Droid continuing to fight while they're falling down from the heavens back into the temple with a good use of light and shadows, all with sick rap music playing in the background. I honestly think this is the best fight scene in the show. Afro ends up victorious by killing Afro Droid with a sword to the head, which fell from the sky from the initial fall, I might add. With Afro Droid defeated, Afro continues up the mountain with Brother 1 ambushing them while they're going up the elevator. Somehow Afro kills him within minutes despite him being on top of the elevator when they were going up. Don't know how that works, but I'm not even gonna question it any further at this point. They make it up the mountain where they come across a mysterious man with a giant teddy bear mask named Kuma. And that's where episode 3 ends. I liked episode 3 a heck of a lot more than episode 2 because while I appreciate the backstory episode 2 gives, I felt more was accomplished with Afro killing Afro Droid and the MT7 all within the duration of this episode. Episode 4. Episode 4 starts with Kuma recognizing Afro, and Afro being hesitant to fight Kuma because his voice is familiar. They fight for a bit and eventually Kuma corners Afro. Right as that happens, we transition to a flashback of a teenage Afro training with the other orphans. During their lunch break, Gino explains to Otsuru why he uses 2 swords instead of 1, and it's here where we find out that Kuma is actually Gino. It's not blatantly said, but anyone with common sense will be able to put 2 and 2 together. The thing that's always confused me about this flashback in particular is that Otsuru still looks like a little kid despite the fact that everyone else is basically grown. I thought she was supposed to be the same age as Afro and Gino. We then see Afro once again confronting some bandits about the number 2, and of course they say they know nothing about it and they end up getting into a fight. You should know the formula by now. Except this time, Gino helps Afro out. Really, that's the only difference for this confrontation. Aside from that, it's just the same old slash and kill the thugs minigame that's been going on throughout every episode so far. Afterwards, Gino and Afro gets eliminated, and while doing so, Gino says Afro should just move on and forget about revenge and accept the new family that he has. Afro doesn't respond, and we then cut to Afro and the rest of the students watching some fireworks. The next day, word gets out that the current owner of the number 2 is none other than their own master. Afro and Gino overhear this when they're selling vegetables. Gino refuses to believe such a thing, but Afro, on the other hand, is curious to see if this is actually true and asks his master during the graduation. Swordmaster confirms this to be true and tells Afro to meet him by the Bodhi tree at midnight. Midnight comes, and sure enough, Swordmaster is there waiting. Before they fight, he tells Afro that he has to choose between forgetting revenge or killing him. He then warns him that if he does kill him and become number 2, of how he'll never be able to make friends and his life will be in ruin. He also mentioned that he was going to take the secret to his grave. One of the things that really bothers me about this reasoning is this. Remember what I told you guys earlier? Once he gets back, he gets chewed out by his master who tells him that living the life of the number 2 leads to nothing but a life of murder. Remember this line because it becomes relevant for what happens later. The reason I told you that is because I find it very hypocritical for Afro's master to get angry at Afro for asking about the number 2 when he was younger, saying about how bad it is, yet here he is challenging Afro in a fight to the death for the headband instead of just, oh I don't know, flat out giving it to him? What's stopping Swordmaster from just giving Afro the headband? What happened to that not kill people mentality they had in episode 2? It seems like such a sudden change in character that comes out of absolutely nowhere and just seems to be here as an excuse for Afro to kill his own master. Anyway, before Afro and Swordmaster can fight, Gino and the other students confront them, both confused as to what's going on. Before they can explain, they end up getting ambushed by some bandits again, except this time, they end up overpowering most of the students with some of them actually getting killed, and are saved by Swordmaster and Afro, with Swordmaster getting some minor injuries. After the bandits have been taken care of, Afro and Swordmaster start to fight. Gino, gravely injured from their fight with the bandits, begs Afro not to go through with killing their master, but Afro is too consumed by getting revenge that he ends up killing his master anyway. This is one of my biggest gripes with this whole story. So you mean to tell me that Afro killed his own master just with some cloth without even the slightest bit of remorse? Keep in mind, this isn't just some random thug or bandit, this is Afro's master. The man who taught Afro everything he knows about sword fighting, raised him from a child into a man, gave him a place to sleep, and gave him a family. Yet when his own master tells him that he has to kill him in order to get the number 2, which in of itself is out of character already, his reaction is just, reaction is that? It makes it seem like Afro has absolutely zero emotion left in his body at all. And this is before he got the headband, so you can't even use the excuse, oh well, maybe he's become desensitized to death. Not that that excuse would really help, considering he had never killed anyone who was close to him up to that point. And to make matters worse, I didn't feel an ounce of emotion when their master passed away because of how one-dimensional he was. He was legitimately just the teacher who teaches the main character things and does nothing else archetype. Heck, he didn't even have a real name. He was literally just called Swordmaster. If I was supposed to feel something, I felt nothing, and that's not good if you're trying to tell a compelling narrative. Gino, naturally, is furious with Afro, but ends up falling off of a cliff or walking backwards due to shock. Afro, now in despair, is approached by Ninja, who asks him if he's making the right decision. Afro then ties the headband around his head, and we cut back to the present where Afro is continuing his fight with Gino. Gino takes off his mask and shows that he is indeed alive, and that his tears haven't stopped falling since the day that their master died. He then rushes to attack and strikes what we presume to be Afro. This episode was average in my opinion because when I think about it, most of the issues I have with this show comes from this episode. With the Swordmaster's sudden change of heart and Afro's lack of emotion when he killed his master, this is an episode that when I watched it the first couple of times, I thought was one of the best, but now I think it's one of the worst. Even Afro's fight with Gino wasn't as impressive as the fight with Afro Droid. I think this episode's fight had the best aesthetic, as I've always been a fan of mountains and snow as visual eye candy. But in terms of actual fighting, not much really happened outside the first few minutes at the beginning of the episode. Episode 5. It turns out that the person Gino ended up slicing was Ninja instead of Afro as he jumped in at the last minute. It's here where we discover that Ninja was simply a figment of Afro's imagination and that he wasn't actually there, which explains a lot considering how he tended to just show up randomly. Although if Ninja isn't real, it does make me wonder what blocked Gino's strike earlier. Afro and Gino continue fighting while a mad scientist named Darman, who for some reason reminds me of Krang from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, monitors their fight. Wait. Hold up, is that an eggplant on Darman's computer? Darman mentions how impressed he is with Gino and that his anger has made him stronger than Afro. We then get a flashback of the MT7 who are seen nursing Otsuru and Gino back to health. And while this explains why Gino and Otsuru were working for the MT7, it doesn't explain why Otsuru wanted to kill Afro. I mean, think about it. We know why Gino wants to kill Afro, but Otsuru and Afro were on good terms when he left. Did she just do it because the MT7 made her do it? If that's the case, why didn't she just tell Afro about the situation when she found him, and then they could have just fought them together? I know it sounds kind of far-fetched, but I just wish we got to learn more about Otsuru's motivation for wanting to kill Afro. Moving on, we cut back to Afro and Gino's fight with Gino gaining the upper hand, and we then see another flashback of Gino getting used to his new body as well as him getting enraged when he goes back to their old dojo, and is reminded of what Afro did. We cut back to the present where Gino is still kicking Afro's butt, and while fighting, Afro realizes how everyone he once cared about is now dead, and a lot of it is because of him. The fight ends with Afro killing Gino by slicing his torso. With Gino defeated, Afro finally goes on to face Justice. When he reaches him, Justice tells Afro that he's been watching his journey and reveals that Rokutaro wanted to hide the headband in hopes that the world would eventually forget about them, and on top of that, Justice also reveals that there are multiple headbands. After some more further monologuing, they start fighting, and this is one of the weakest fights in the show. Yeah, out of all the fights that happen in the show, I feel this one is the least interesting. It's also the shortest, I might add. They got more tense near the end of the fight when Justice penetrates Afro's head with a spike, but luckily his hair is thick enough that it acted as a shield, so that removed any sort of tension that scene could have had. He then kills Justice by slicing him up like a shish kebab. Afro then becomes the new #1, and the episode ends with Gino, who is now wearing all the previous headbands, challenging Afro once again. I'm not even going to bother asking how he came back to life because I realize it would be pointless at this point. That aside, this last scene features the best piece of music in the entire show, and I love the scene because of that. Speaking of which, Afro Samurai soundtrack though. How do I describe such a phenomenon? Love it! They got RZA from Wu-Tang to make the music for this series and it is fire. Cool R&B, cool hip-hop, cool rap. I know for some people it may just seem pretty generic, but to me it's cool because I can't think of any other anime outside of this one that uses rap and just black music in general. In terms of technicality, as good as the animation is in Afro Samurai, I can't help but feel that the color palette just is very bland. A whole lot of blacks and whites and red for blood and yellow for lemonade and maybe even some other various colors for some other ambiguous things, but aside from that, it just has this whole black and white look to it, which in my opinion doesn't look that appealing. If anything, it looks like you're watching the series through some dirty toilet water. I get that Afro Samurai is a dark series, and I guess they wanted the color palette to reflect that, but the thing is, you can have a dark series and have a beautiful color palette. I mean, just look at animes like Attack on Titan, for example. And that was Afro Samurai, the anime version anyway. For me, the biggest problem with the narrative is this. The headband's origins, you know, the things that people are killing each other over, are never explained. We don't know who made the headband, what makes them so sacred, what's stopping someone from making a counterfeit headband. These are some of the many questions that I had that were never answered, and I feel this could have been a better narrative in anime if something as basic as that was elaborated on more. I'll say this. It's an anime that's good to watch if you want to see a black samurai kill people, see dope anime fight scenes with dope music by the RZA himself, or something to turn your brain off to. But if you're looking for a deep, fleshed out plot with well-written characters, then I'm sorry to say that this anime series isn't for you. If anything, I'd recommend the manga. The manga's narrative still has some problems that are similar to that of anime, like the Swordmaster not having a proper name, or the headband's origins not being explained, but the characters are more fleshed out, and the manga has a better ending that actually surprised me. Overall, I rate this show a lemonade out of 10. It's anime that has some sweet spots, but also some sour spots. Also, big up to the creator Takashi Okazaki for properly drawing black characters, not just using some bastardized version of blackface. Bye!